Chad, if we pivot here, obviously in today's environment, unfortunately, two-thirds of the population are overweight or obese. We've got levels of prediabetes or all-time highs. And, around the world, this is a problem. I think there's something like 450 million people with type 2 diabetes. And so whilst we have dietary interventions and exercise is important, using other strategies, medications, supplements, botanical medicines. So something that I use in practice, berberine has
Yep.
antimicrobial properties, anti-inflammatory properties, but it also has an effect on lowering glucose, which you know well as you've done some research in the area. Could you talk us through the potential effects of berberine on glucose and the research that you did?
Yeah. So we recently published a study. We're actually looking at just kind of a different formulation of berberine because berberine
Mhm.
itself, it's bioavailability, or what we mean by bioavailability is if we ingest, let's just for hypothetical numbers. For goodness sakes, these are not real numbers with berberine. But if you just to illustrate the concept of bioavailability, if you ingested 10 grams, something with low bioavailability, well, maybe only 1 gram becomes available to the tissues of the body. So
Yeah.
it has a 10%, 1 out of 10 grams, whereas something with high bioavailability might, like 9 grams of it, 8 grams of it might get into the tissue. So it would, have a much higher bioavailability. So again, those are nowhere near the dosages that we would throw out for berberine. But berberine as a whole has relatively low bioavailability. So what you have to do then is you either have to, one strategy to overcome that is to increase the dosage. Well, when you increase the dosage, then we start to see a little bit more frequent occurrences of adverse events,
Mhm.
stomach upset, GI upset. Things just start to get uncomfortable with a number of different. So that was kind of a problem with berberine for a while there. So the company that we worked with, they had developed a type of berberine that was basically dihydroberberine. So they kind of chemically altered it a little bit, and they did, and it. So we were really, the paper that we published was trying to just compare basically how much berberine appeared in the blood after ingesting it. And we certainly showed that that the dihydroberberine did a pretty good job of overcoming that low bioavailability aspect. Now, from the other literature that's out there, honestly, it's one of those pretty fascinating things. I honestly haven't looked at the literature base that closely in the past year or so.
Mhm.
But it's one of those things that because berberine really got pretty popular there for a while, and there's not an abundance of literature on, let's say, like healthy populate, healthy populations. I think there's much more work that has been done in like type 2 diabetes populations, other clinical type populations. And if we talk about berberine's efficacy in those populations, there does seem to be a pretty consistent movement on its ability to help improve glucose and insulin management. The insulin management is not surprising because as I teach it, basically insulin follows glucose. So if glucose levels are high, insulin levels are going to be high.
Mhm.
And if glucose levels are low, insulin levels are going to be low. So I think, berberine's ability in those populations to help improve glucose management, is certainly favorable because, for these pre-diabetes and type 2 diabetic populations, it's the chronic hyperglycemia and hyperinsulinemia that really wreaks a lot of havoc on like the interior vasculature,
Yeah.
and where we start to see over time with many of these populations where they develop various neuropathies, where basically like the microcirculation just starts to get compromised. So those are and a lot of the mechanisms are kind of associated with, we see like acute increases in inflammation as a result of the hyperglycemia and hyperinsulinemia. So anything that can help bring those levels down are somewhat kind of viewed favorably.
Yeah, it's interesting with botanical medicines. It's always the challenge is that the uptake of it's easy to put something in a capsule, but to actually get it absorbed and taken up, as
Yep.
you mentioned, that bioavailability is a challenge. And so it's interesting to see some of the work around berberine, because like you mentioned, when we see that phenotype of the type 2 diabetic with a lot of central adiposity, we know that there's going to be a lot of this, as the visceral fat goes up, we've got more chronic inflammation. We tend to have more dysbiotic gut terrain, which adversely affects things like even glucose response. So it's an interesting botanical medicine for its impact on inflammation and antimicrobial effect, and potentially, but like you said, more, a lot more work needs to be done. But fascinating to see that you can alter things to be able to improve bioavailability. That
Yeah, it's a really nice example of just innovation kind of within, dietary supplements, nutrition supplements, and things along those lines. The thing that I, and there's be a lot of people that may not want to hear this. I think a lot of times people really kind of, like talking about a different supplement or things along those lines. But I mean, I'm an exercise physiologist at my core. And the thing that we have to highlight, it goes back to that focus on the foundations. I mean, one of the primary things that an individual who's overweight, obese, pre-diabetic, starting to see some challenges with hyperglycemia, single best way to improve that is physical activity.
yeah,
Is to get your muscles active. I mean, our skeletal muscle is the largest tissue responsible for peripheral glucose uptake. What that means
like a
is
sponge for glucose, right?
it's exactly right. That's exactly when that's the picture that we want to put in everybody's head, is that when we exercise and and again, don't make that statement harder than what it needs to be. Don't ask that question of, well, what type of exercise? No. Exercise, go, just go.
Yeah.
So if that's a walk, a jog, a swim, an elliptical, a aerobics class, a cycle, upright, recumbent, I don't care. You want to lift weights? Great. You want to use machines, free weights, kettlebells? Don't care.
Nice.
Go move. When we use our muscles in that way, it makes those muscles much more like a sponge. What I use in my teaching is basically like an unhealthy muscle cell is like a rubber kickball on the playground. If you dump water on that ball, if that water's that glucose, that water on an unhealthy cell, it just runs right over the ball. It doesn't get absorbed. But a healthy cell is a Nerf ball, is a sponge ball, and you dump that water on that Nerf ball, and it just sucks it right up. So and just exercise. Do not overcomplicate it. Just exercise is the number one thing. Then, if you want to make it even better, then a little bit more volume of exercise, a little bit higher intensity. So grab a little bit bigger weight. Increase the intensity a little bit on your intervals, or make the speed a little bit higher on your treadmill, or increase the grade, and now we're making those muscles contract a little bit harder. We get a few more muscles involved, but that's a classic scenario where I think too many people want to point towards something like a botanical and turn their back upon exercise, because just going out and getting physical activity isn't very sexy, but it's pretty foundational.